What would you do if the world believed your life was falling apart, and the only way to save it was to lie? That was the question that haunted one of the richest men on the planet, a billionaire CEO whose name once commanded headlines, until scandal threatened to erase him entirely. And the way he chose to survive, he faked love. It began on a cold January morning in New York City. Snow swirled through the streets like silver dust, settling on the marble steps of a towering skyscraper where he held court over billions. He stood at the edge of his corner office, staring out at the city, a fortress of glass reflecting a life built on ambition and risk. But the headlines were coming fast, whispers of corporate misdeeds, rumored betrayals, and a public image teetering on the edge of collapse. In the world of billionaires, reputation isn't just everything, it's survival. He needed a story, something to distract the public, to rewrite the narrative before it spiraled beyond control. That's when she appeared. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic, the kind of presence that could light up a room and silence it at the same time. A rising socialite, talented, ambitious, and unknown enough to make the perfect face for a ruse. The plan was simple: fake an engagement, a brief, highly publicized romance designed to charm the tabloids, reset his image, and buy him time. The announcement came at a gala that glittered like a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of light over the crowd, each guest a high-powered player in their own right, dressed in couture that seemed to shimmer with quiet power. Cameras flashed, capturing the first staged moment of their love story. Hands intertwined, smiles practiced, eyes meeting in a way that seemed real but was meticulously choreographed. The public ate it up. Headlines screamed, from scandal to romance, billionaire's heart on the mend. The plan was working, but here's where the story started to unravel, because she believed it, not in a calculated way, not as part of a con, but fully, completely. Somewhere between the charity galas and red carpet appearances, between private dinners overlooking city skylines and whispered phone calls in the dead of night, something unplanned happened. She fell in love with him, and for the first time, the billionaire so used to controlling every narrative found himself losing control. In the quiet hours, when the world thought he was preparing for his next press release, he was thinking about her, about the curve of her smile and the soft glow of candlelight, about the way she laughed, a sound that didn't belong in boardrooms or shareholder meetings, but in the secret, untouchable corners of life. He tried to remind himself it was all an act, a story he had written to protect himself, but the lines between reality and performance began to blur. The tension grew like a storm on the horizon. Public appearances continued, each one more elaborate than the last. Paparazzi followed their every step. Brunches at hidden cafes, weekend getaways to exclusive islands, private jets streaking across oceans. Fans dissected every photo, every social media post, desperate to know if this love was real. Inside he felt a growing dread, because if she discovered the truth that she had been cast as a character in his desperate play, it could shatter everything. And yet, she never doubted him, never hesitated. She met his eyes in crowded rooms, in hallways lined with marble and gold. With the same warmth and sincerity that had drawn him in from the start, she made his fake story feel real. The irony was almost cruel. He had staged a lie to save himself, only to be undone by the authenticity of her heart. Friends began to notice. Staff whispered in corners. His closest advisors, the ones who had orchestrated the media strategy down to the last word, started to worry. He's losing himself, one would murmur, and they were right. The man who had mastered risk and power now faced a different kind of danger. Vulnerability. A vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show. Not in boardrooms, not in contracts, not in headlines. It all came to a head during a charity auction in Beverly Hills, a night designed for spectacle. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny stars, the elite of the world bidding on art and influence, the air thick with perfume and ambition. And there she was, radiant, laughing in a way that made him ache. He was supposed to play the part, to smile for the cameras, to nod along with every public question. But instead, he found himself staring at her, caught off guard by a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with press strategy or reputation management. Then came the proposal, the moment that would define everything. It was supposed to be a gesture for show, a carefully scripted performance to cement the story in public consciousness. The press were waiting, cameras poised to capture his every move. He got down on one knee, the world holding its breath, and then she said yes. Not because it was scripted, not because she was part of his plan. She said yes because, somehow, in the midst of the fabrication, she had fallen for him, completely, unreservedly. In that moment, the billionaire CEO realized that he had created a lie so elaborate it had looped back on him, forcing him into a truth he had never anticipated. The story had spun out of control, and yet, for the first time, it felt real. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Social media exploded, financial news outlets analyzed every angle, every motive, speculating on whether the engagement was genuine or another calculated move. Investors and competitors watched with bated breath, and behind the gilded walls of his mansion, away from the glare of cameras and headlines, they were just two people learning to navigate the strange, uncharted territory of love that had begun as a lie. Yet not everyone was convinced. Some saw it as manipulation, a masterstroke of public relations genius. Others whispered that she had known all along that perhaps her affection had been part of her own strategy. In private, he wrestled with his conscience, with questions he had never allowed himself to consider. Could love born from deception survive scrutiny? Could a life built on power, wealth, and careful orchestration ever reconcile with the vulnerability of the heart? Late nights in his office became a battlefield of thoughts. The skyline sprawled endlessly outside, lights blinking like distant stars, and he wondered how he had been so blind. He had controlled markets, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and shaped empires. But love, it seemed, was an entirely different kind of risk one he could neither predict nor manage. And then, just as the world began to accept the narrative of their romance, a message arrived, intraceable, anonymous, and cryptic. It suggested that someone knew the truth behind the engagement, someone who had been watching all along, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, the carefully constructed life of deception and truth teetered on a knife's edge. Every public smile, every private touch, now carried the weight of exposure. The billionaire's greatest fear wasn't losing wealth or power, it was losing her. He stared at the message, heart racing, palms slick. Outside, the city continued its ceaseless motion, oblivious to the quiet storm inside the glass tower. And in that stillness, one question echoed louder than any headline, any boardroom negotiation, any calculated move. Could a love born of pretense survive the revelation of truth? Because in a world where image is everything, and the rich and powerful are expected to be untouchable, the cost of honesty could be more than a scandal, it could be catastrophic. And as he prepared for the day that might change everything, one thought lingered in his mind, unshakable. She had made it real, but at what price? The message sat on his desk like a coiled snake, its words simple, deliberate, and chilling. The truth always comes out. Be ready. No sender, no signature, nothing but the weight of inevitability. He stared at it, heart pounding, the skyline beyond the window suddenly feeling distant, unreal, as if the city itself had stepped back, leaving him exposed under some invisible spotlight. Every carefully curated image, every staged smile, suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable. He reached for his phone, tempted to call his lawyers, his security team, anyone who could help him unravel the origin, but he stopped. Something told him that no one could fix this, not with money, not with influence. This was personal. This was about the lie he had built to save himself, and the truth that had grown between him and her. The truth that now trembled under the threat of exposure. The next morning she arrived at his penthouse. Sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching dust motes like tiny diamonds in the air. She was unaware, of course. Her presence carried the same warmth and gravity that had drawn him in from the start. She moved through the space as though it were hers, adjusting a vase here, rearranging a book there, unaware of the storm that had settled behind his calm exterior. "Coffee?" she asked, voice soft, familiar. He forced a smile, the practiced mask slipping only slightly. "Sure." They sat across from each other at the marble table, steam curling from their cups. For a moment, the world shrank to just that room. The noise of the city muted, the chaos of press and speculation on pause. He wanted to tell her everything, the fake engagement, the plan, the message, but couldn't. Not yet. Not when her faith in him felt like fragile glass. Instead, he nodded, spoke of trivialities, keeping the conversation light, but inside, every heartbeat screamed. She was real. Their moments together were real. And yet, the foundation, his own plan, was a lie. The dichotomy made his chest ache. Over the next few days, subtle changes began to unfold. Anonymous whispers in the office corridors, subtle glances from longtime staff, a tension that had never existed before. He noticed it during a board meeting when a senior executive hesitated before sharing numbers, as though watching him for signs someone knew or suspected. The first breach occurred quietly. An image appeared on a gossip blog, her laughing at a cafe with him, candid and unposed. But it wasn't just the photo, it was the caption. "How long can a billionaire keep up a charade?" The comment thread exploded, speculation raging in real time. Investors called, some concerned, others curious. Tabloid journalists smelled a story that could redefine the narrative they had been so carefully building. He realized that the game he had mastered, the manipulation of perception, was slipping through his fingers. The stakes were no longer abstract, they were intimate, immediate. And then came the call that shook him more than any headline could. A voice, calm, deliberate, on the line, saying only, "I know what you did, and she knows now too." The line went dead. For hours he sat in silence, the words echoing in his mind. She knew. She could be angry, betrayed, disillusioned, or worse. She could walk away, taking the one thing he had not counted on, the fragile hope that their connection, however improbable, was real. When she arrived that evening, he could see it in her eyes. A storm, quiet but unmistakable. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, her smile faint, measured. "You're distracted," she said softly, her voice carrying both concern and accusation. He struggled, words failing him. How do you confess a truth that's been built over months, layers upon layers of performance, when the other person has woven it into their own heart? She studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his. Whatever it is, we face it together, right? The sincerity in her tone, the weight behind her words, made his resolve crumble. He wanted to believe it, to surrender to the vulnerability that now seemed inevitable. But before he could answer, a sharp knock came at the door. Security guards entered, discreet but firm, holding a package, no return address. The envelope inside was thick, expensive stationery, and the handwriting was familiar, not his, not anyone in his immediate circle. He tore it open. Inside were photographs, images of them, candid, private, moments from their last week together, laughing in the penthouse, cooking in the kitchen, even a quiet moment on the balcony overlooking the city. Each photo had been taken without their knowledge, without consent. A note accompanied them. Truth has a price. Pay attention. He swallowed, the pit in his stomach deepening. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. Someone had invaded their lives, peeling back the carefully constructed walls of their intimacy. And she hadn't seen it yet. When she picked up the photos, her breath caught. She turned them over in her hands, the smile fading, confusion and hurt mingling in her gaze. Who would do this? I don't know, he said, voice tight, but it's serious. Someone knows more than they should. For the first time, fear replaced the practiced confidence that had carried him through every financial crisis, every media storm, every deal worth billions. Fear for her, fear for what this revelation could do to their fragile trust. And yet, through the fear, there was a strange, undeniable truth. The connection they shared, forged in pretense and tempered by genuine feeling, had never been stronger. Days turned into a tense blur. They moved cautiously, their routines altered to avoid public exposure. Security protocols tightened. Even the smallest interactions, dining out, taking a walk, entering the office, carried the weight of potential surveillance. And yet, they found moments to steal away, little islands of normalcy in a world that had become a stage. During one such moment, a private helicopter ride over the city at night, the lights below flickering like fireflies caught in glass. She spoke quietly, her voice almost swallowed by the hum of the rotors. Do you love me? He looked at her, the city stretching endlessly beneath them, the question carrying a weight far beyond romance. He thought of the lie that had started it, the truth that had grown between them, and the danger that now shadowed their every move. Yes, he said finally, voice steady. I know I do, more than I ever thought I could. She reached for his hand, intertwining fingers, anchoring themselves against the uncertainty below. Then we keep going, she said, no matter what comes. But the calm was temporary. The next day, the world erupted. An investigative journalist, known for ruthless accuracy, published an expose that went viral within hours. The piece detailed supposed inconsistencies in the CEO's personal life, highlighting the engagement and hinting at manipulation. Social media ignited, speculative threads sprawling across platforms, every detail analyzed, dissected, scrutinized. The narrative he had crafted to save his reputation was now being questioned by the very public it was meant to sway. He watched the headlines scroll across his private office screen, a strange detachment settling over him. And then he noticed something unexpected. She was still by his side, defiant, unwavering. Even as the world speculated, she hadn't wavered, she hadn't left. The realization hit him like a jolt. Love, once an act, was no longer a performance. The stakes had risen beyond reputation, beyond power, beyond fear. The vulnerability he had feared, the surrender to genuine feeling, was now the most valuable thing he had. She had made the lie real, and now, together they faced the consequences of that reality. That night, alone in the penthouse, he stared out at the city lights, their glow both comforting and menacing. He understood, finally, that the true risk was not in public exposure, not in scandal, not in the judgments of the powerful. The true risk was in letting her in completely, in trusting that the heart could survive the fallout of lies. And then, as if the universe had chosen that exact moment to escalate the tension, another message arrived, this time on his encrypted phone. The words were simple, almost conversational. You thought you could hide behind love, but now, the world will decide who you really are. Be ready. He read it, his stomach twisting. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent to the drama unfolding in one apartment at the very top of a skyscraper. He turned to her, her silhouette framed by the moonlight streaming through the windows, and realized that the battle they were about to face was not just about truth or deception, but about the very essence of their connection. In that suspended moment, the world could wait. But the question lingered, heavy and relentless. Could love, born from deception and tempered by reality, survive when every secret, every intention, every lie was laid bare for all to see? He didn't have the answer, not yet. But as she reached out and rested her head against his shoulder, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somewhere in the shadows of the skyscraper, someone was watching, waiting, orchestrating the next move in a game far bigger than either of them could yet comprehend. The stage was set. The players were in position. And the billionaire CEO who had once faked love to save himself, now found himself trapped in a reality more dangerous and more real than he had ever imagined. The city outside his penthouse windows was quiet. almost reverent, as though the streets themselves held their breath. Fog curled around the skyscrapers, blurring the lights into hazy streaks of gold and white. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual, suffused with tension, the air thick with anticipation. He sat on the edge of the sofa, hands pressed against his temples, trying to make sense of the encrypted message that had appeared hours ago. Whoever was behind it wasn't just playing a game, they were rewriting it entirely. She moved across the room, her presence calm, her expression cautious. Every gesture, every subtle shift in posture, betrayed the careful balance between trust and fear. She had seen the headlines, the viral posts, the whispers creeping through their world, and yet she stayed. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching, demanding an honesty he hadn't yet been able to give. "I can't lie to you anymore," he murmured, his voice barely above the hum of the city. "There's someone watching, someone who knows more than we thought." Her hands paused in midair, frozen as though absorbing the gravity of his words. "More than us?" she asked softly. He nodded. "They've been planning this. The engagement, everything, the attention, the photos, the leaks. It was never just random. It's a strategy, and we're the pieces on their board." Her eyes widened. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, and he realized she had always assumed the worst came from him, from his ambition, his control, his reputation. But this was external, unseen, unstoppable. The first sign of escalation came that evening. A knock at the door, sharp, insistent. He didn't recognize the number, and yet the timing was deliberate. He opened the door to find a courier holding a plain black envelope. No markings, no return address. Inside were 3 items: a photograph, a small USB drive, and a handwritten note. The photograph was simple, him alone, stepping into the elevator hours earlier. Yet in the corner of the image was a shadowy figure, obscured, watching. The note read, "We are closer than you think. The next choice will matter." The USB drive hummed faintly when he plugged it into his laptop. A video file opened, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a montage of moments he had thought private. Them walking through the city, laughing over coffee, moments on the balcony, late-night conversations. Then the camera shifted, and he saw her unaware, unposed, and completely natural. His stomach sank. They weren't just watching him, they were cataloging her too. She had stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. Her lips parted slightly, and he could see the confusion flicker in her eyes. This is stalking," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. He wanted to pull her into his arms, shield her, but he couldn't, not yet. The fear gnawed at him, not fear for himself, but for her. She had become the unintended target in a game he hadn't anticipated, and the weight of that realization pressed down like a physical force. The following day, the world began to twist in unexpected ways. An anonymous leak hit the financial press, claiming that the CEO's company was under investigation for irregularities. Datos, vague but charged enough to ignite speculation. Investors panicked. Shares dipped. Headlines merged the personal with the professional. Billionaire's engagement in question as corporate scandal looms. It was a perfect storm, orchestrated with precision. He moved quickly, but every action seemed reactive, as though the rules of the game were constantly changing. Meetings with lawyers and PR teams blurred together. Calls from worried board members rang incessantly. He could sense the public narrative slipping further from his control, yet he also sensed something new, a pattern in the chaos. Someone wanted more than to destroy his reputation. They wanted leverage, control, perhaps even to test him. And then came the first twist. One night, as he combed through the digital evidence, cross-referencing timestamps and locations, he noticed something odd. A series of anomalies in the metadata suggested that some of the leaks had originated internally, not from a hacker, not from the paparazzi, but from someone with access, someone close, someone he trusted. The realization hit like ice water. The walls around him, carefully constructed over years, began to crack. Trust, once an unshakable foundation, now seemed precarious. And worse, he could feel the implications extending beyond himself. Touching her, their relationship, the fragile reality they had built together. She sensed the change. That night, they sat in silence on the balcony, the city lights shimmering below like a scattering of stars. Her hand found his, tentative but seeking connection. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, staring at the horizon. "Someone we know might be betraying us, or at least manipulating events from the inside." Her grip tightened. "Then we fight together," she said. But even as she spoke, he saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Trust had become a battlefield. Days turned into a tense dance. Every movement, every conversation, every email and message was scrutinized. Their lives became a series of calculations. Who could be trusted? What could be exposed? What was bait? Yet amidst the paranoia, something extraordinary happened. Their bond, forged in deception but tempered by shared vulnerability, began to deepen. Moments that once felt staged small dinners, late-night walks, whispered confessions now carried genuine weight, subtle but undeniable. And then, the midpoint shift. A package arrived at her office. She opened it without hesitation, revealing a small, elegant box. Inside was a ring, not just any ring, but one engraved with a symbol she recognized immediately, the private insignia of his family, a legacy mark she had only seen him wear once, in a rare moment of candidness. There was no note, no explanation, just the ring. Her first instinct was wonder, then suspicion. She called him immediately, voice sharp with a mix of awe and alarm. "Did you send this?" He froze. "No," he said, and the words carried a strange finality. "I swear I didn't." The implications were staggering. Whoever was orchestrating this was not just watching, they were intimate with their world, familiar with their routines, their symbols, their history. This was no longer random surveillance or media manipulation. This was personal, intrusive, dangerous. The tension escalated further when she received a text from an unknown number. "He trusts you, but do you trust him?" She showed it to him immediately. The message was more than unsettling, it was a challenge, a provocation. And in that moment he realized something he had never admitted, even to himself. Their story, the engagement, the love was now a pawn in a larger game. And if they weren't careful, the consequences could be devastating, not just to reputation, but to their lives. Sleep became elusive. Days blurred into nights. Each moment of calm was punctuated by sudden alarms, untraceable calls, shadowy figures caught on surveillance, whispers of corporate leaks and personal exposure. Their penthouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, every window a potential lens, every visitor a potential spy. Amidst this chaos, a strange intimacy emerged. They learned to communicate in subtle signals, shared glances, coded phrases, minor gestures that became lifelines. Vulnerability, once terrifying, became armor. They were no longer just a billionaire and a socialite caught in a media storm. They were allies, co-conspirators in their own survival. One evening, while reviewing security footage, he noticed a pattern he hadn't before. A recurring figure, always in the background, always observing, always just out of focus. The same figure from the photograph now appearing at multiple locations. A cafe, a parking garage, even the charity gala. The realization sent a chill down his spine. This was not coincidence. This was a deliberate presence, a shadow moving through their lives with intent. She saw the unease in his eyes and asked, softly, "Do you think they're testing us?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think the test isn't about money, or power, or even love. It's about trust and survival." That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked the length of the apartment, gaze fixed on the horizon, thinking of the stakes, the lies, and the reality that had begun to crystallize. That love, even genuine love, could be weaponized, scrutinized, and manipulated. And yet, it was the only thing that felt untouchable, the one thing that had never been fully controlled. Then, just as the first light of dawn began to pierce the fog, a new development arrived, a direct, unambiguous message. "Meet me midnight, the old pier alone. Come prepared." He read it over and over, feeling the weight of its implications. Whoever had sent this wasn't just orchestrating events, they wanted a confrontation, a decision, and perhaps the next move in a game whose rules were still unclear. He looked at her, asleep in the soft morning light, her hand resting on the edge of the sofa. The realization struck him with full force. This was no longer about protecting his reputation, or faking love, or surviving media scrutiny. This was about them, about the truth of their bond, tested under impossible conditions, and the consequences of stepping into a shadowed world where nothing was as it seemed. He knew then that the next move would change everything, and as the city below stirred awake, oblivious to the storm in his penthouse, he understood one immutable fact: the game had only just begun. The night air was cold, biting against his skin as he stepped out of the car onto the cracked concrete of the abandoned pier. Fog rolled in thick, curling around the broken pilings like ghostly fingers. The river beyond shrouded in darkness. The city behind him glimmered faintly, a distant heartbeat of lights, oblivious to the tension gripping him. Every sense was heightened, the distant call of a gull, the scrape of metal beneath his boots, the faint smell of salt water and decay. He felt exposed, small, despite the billions he controlled in the boardrooms above. He checked his watch, midnight precise. The message hadn't left room for negotiation. Whoever had orchestrated this wanted him here alone, a king stripped of power, facing something unknown. His instincts screamed caution, but curiosity and the gnawing need for control propelled him forward. Footsteps echoed behind him. He spun, tense, but it was only her. She emerged from the fog, coat pulled tight, hair damp from the mist, eyes bright and alert. She didn't speak, she didn't question. She simply nodded toward him, a silent acknowledgement of the risk they were about to face together. They walked the pier in silence, the boards creaking underfoot. Every step seemed amplified in the still night. He could feel her presence beside him like an anchor, and yet the fear in his chest tightened with every moment. Who was watching? What did they want? And most frightening of all, how much did they already know? Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, lean, movements deliberate and controlled. A hood obscured the face, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The figure stopped a few feet away, hands empty, posture neutral but commanding. "You came," the voice said. Smooth.com, unnervingly familiar. He hesitated, studying the figure. Something about the tone, The cadence it was deliberate, designed to unsettle. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady despite the tightening in his chest. The figure stepped forward slightly, the light catching the edge of a familiar emblem on the Kufa corporate insignia he had only seen on one person. The realization struck like a physical blow. Someone from inside, someone trusted, someone who had orchestrated the leaks, the surveillance, the messages, and now this meeting. "You know why you're here," the figure said, voice low. "It's time to make a choice. Everything you've built, everything you've faked, comes down to this." He exchanged a quick glance with her. Her jaw was set, eyes narrowing with resolve. She knew the stakes, but the question hung unspoken between them. Could they survive this test? Could love, forged in deception and hardened by truth, withstand the onslaught of manipulation? The figure continued, circling them slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. "You've underestimated the reach of the game," they said. "And now, the cost of your choices isn't just your reputation, it's everything. Do you protect yourself or do you protect her?" The words landed like stones in his chest. He realized that every calculated move he had made, the engagement, the distraction, the lies had led to this moment, and for the first time he felt the full weight of consequences. Not the financial kind, not the public kind, but the human kind, the kind that could fracture trust, destroy hearts, and leave irreparable damage. She stepped closer, touching his arm. The touch was a lifeline, grounding him in the swirl of fear and uncertainty. "We face this together," she whispered, not as a suggestion, but as a command. And in that moment he understood something vital. Their bond was no longer incidental. It was their only advantage, the only thing unmeasured, unaccounted for by the manipulator who had brought them here. The figure stopped, directly in front of them now. "I've watched the two of you," they said. "Your actions, your missteps, your moments of vulnerability, they've been fascinating. But fascination isn't forgiveness, and the choice before him is simple. Reveal the truth, or protect the illusion. Your next move will define everything." He swallowed, the tension coiling tight in his throat. He could feel the adrenaline in his limbs, the rapid pulse in his ears. One wrong step could unravel everything. Yet, as he looked at her, he saw a flicker of determination that gave him clarity amidst the chaos. Suddenly a sound shattered the stillness, a low metallic clatter from the edge of the pier. He turned instinctively, heart hammering, and saw nothing but fog and shadows. The figure watched him with an unreadable expression, almost as if testing him. "You hesitate," the figure said, voice deceptively calm. "That hesitation will cost you more than you realize. Time is not your ally." He realized then that the manipulator's goal was psychological as much as strategic. The threat wasn't just exposure, it was indecision, it was fear, it was the erosion of confidence that had always been his armor. He felt the crushing weight of every decision he had made, every lie that had spiraled into something uncontrollable. The fog thickened, swirling around them, dampening sound, isolating them from the world behind the pier. His mind raced options, contingencies, but nothing prepared him for the raw human reality staring back at him. The woman beside him unwavering, trusting despite the chaos, and the figure before him commanding, knowing, relentless. A sudden gust of wind cut across the pier, bringing with it the tang of salt and decay. The boards beneath their feet shuddered, sending a ripple of unease through both of them. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Do you trust me?" she asked suddenly, voice low, almost urgent. The question struck deeper than any threat, any manipulation, not the external danger, not the unseen eyes, not the leaked videos, it was the internal reckoning. Trust, in its most raw and vulnerable form. Could he trust her? Could he trust himself? Could they navigate a world where every truth seemed constructed, every gesture calculated, and yet still find authenticity? He nodded slowly. "With everything," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "Then we go forward, together." The figure regarded them both, the silence stretching taut, suffocating. Then, without another word, they stepped back into the fog, vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. The echo of their presence lingered, heavy and menacing, like a promise of confrontation yet to come. He exhaled, a slow release, though the tension didn't lift entirely. The pier felt colder, lonelier, and infinitely more dangerous. She leaned against him, head resting lightly on his shoulder. They didn't speak, words felt insufficient, fragile. The silence itself carried meaning, a shared understanding of stakes, of trust, of fear. Minutes passed, hours felt like seconds. He scanned the horizon, scanning the river, the fog, every shadow. The manipulator's presence was gone, but the weight of their influence remained, pressing down on every thought, every movement. He realized, with a jolt, that the game had shifted. The external threats, the leaks, the surveillance, the media were no longer the immediate danger. The real risk was psychological, intimate, relentless, the tension of choices, the fragility of trust, the uncertainty of who would act first, and what the consequences would be. As they walked back toward the car, the fog rolling around them like a living thing, he thought of the ring, the photographs, the messages, the escalation, the provocation, the challenge. Each element had been designed to force a reaction, to draw out a truth. and he understood that the climax of this manipulation was approaching inexorably. Her voice broke the silence. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we face it. But we need to be ready. All of it. Nothing held back." He nodded, gripping her hand tighter. The enormity of what lay ahead pressed into him like a tidal wave. Decisions that could destroy or save. Truths that could liberate or shatter. Love that could withstand all or crumble completely. Behind them, the fog thickened, swallowing the pier, hiding threats, concealing eyes. The city slept unaware, but for the first time, he understood that the world they had known, the life of control, influence, and curated appearances, was gone. What remained was raw, exposed, dangerous, and real. And somewhere, just beyond the mist, he felt the presence of the manipulator still watching, calculating, waiting for the inevitable moment when the next choice would have to be made. The air hummed with anticipation, heavy and electric, and he realized, with a clarity that was almost terrifying, there was no turning back now. The storm had begun. Every action, every word, every heartbeat from this point forward would carry consequences far beyond what they had imagined. He looked at her again, the woman who had transformed a lie into reality, and felt the full weight of the stakes. Love, trust, and survival intertwined, teetering on a knife edge. And in that suspended instant, he understood the truth that had been creeping toward him all along their lives. Their hearts, their world, were about to change in ways they could not yet fathom. The fog thickened. The wind picked up. The river beneath the pier whispered secrets in its dark flow. And somewhere beyond, in the shadows, the game moved forward, inexorable, relentless, waiting for the moment when the final confrontation would force all truths into the light. Everything hung in balance. Everything. The pier was silent, except for the whisper of water against the pilings, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the tension coiling in his chest. Fog lay thick like a curtain, swallowing the edges of the world, and yet, every sound, every distant creak, every soft footstep felt magnified. He could feel her hand in his, warm and steady, the only tether to the world that seemed to be unraveling around them. The figure emerged from the mist, no longer hidden, no longer a shadow. The hood fell back, revealing a face he had trusted once, a face he had counted on, a face that had been close enough to build empires beside him, and now held a knife at the fragile core of his life. The manipulator's eyes were cold, calculating, yet there was a glimmer of something else: satisfaction, perhaps, or curiosity, or the perverse thrill of seeing their careful orchestration reach its crescendo. "You came," the figure said, voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "Exactly when I hoped you would." He stepped forward, chest tight, adrenaline coursing. "Why, what is this about?" The figure smiled, slow, deliberate. "It's always been about truth, and you, more than anyone, have been running from it." He glanced at her. She squeezed his hand, silent encouragement, and he realized that for the first time, the choice wasn't about power or money or even fear. It was about honesty, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Their lives, their love, everything they had built, real or constructed, hung in the balance. "Truth," he said, voice low, sharp. "What truth?" "Everything you've done, every message, every photograph, every leak. What do you want from me?" The manipulator stepped closer, the fog curling around them like a living thing. "I want to see if you are capable of being real, of being human. If you can survive this night without hiding, without lies, without masks." And the gaze shifted toward her, lingering. "She is the ultimate test. Can she trust you, or will the world tear her faith apart?" Her breath caught. He could feel her trembling beside him, not from fear, but from the weight of revelation. The manipulator had seen through everything: the engagement, the staged smiles, the false narrative, and had reduced it all to a single question: what is real? Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch time, the manipulator pulled a folder from beneath their coat. Inside were documents, photographs, files, proofs of every secret, every misstep, every miscalculation that had been hidden beneath layers of wealth and influence. The weight of it hit him like a physical blow. Everything he had buried, every plan, every fabrication, it was all laid bare. He wanted to speak, to deny, to justify, but the truth was a hammer striking the glass walls he had built. He looked at her, searching for fear, for disappointment, for betrayal. Instead, he found understanding, acceptance, the quiet strength of someone who had chosen to see him, not the CEO, not the strategist, not the manipulator, but the man beneath it all. "You knew," he whispered, voice raw. "You must have known." She shook her head. "I didn't need to know. I trusted you. That's all I ever needed." The words were simple, fragile, immense. In that instant, he realized that the love he had feared, that had grown from a lie, was the one element no manipulator could touch. No photograph, no leak, no threat could erode the authenticity between them. She had chosen him, not the facade, not the persona, but the man who had dared to open himself to something he couldn't control. The manipulator stepped back, folding their arms, a smirk playing across their lips. "Impressive," they said. "I thought you would crumble. I thought the pressure would break you both. But you've survived." "For now." "Survived," he echoed, voice low, but it wasn't defiance. It was realization. Survival wasn't just about strategy. Survival was about truth, about trust, about love. And he had never understood the depth of that equation until this moment. Then the manipulator did something unexpected. They turned and walked into the fog, vanishing as silently as they had appeared, leaving behind only the echo of their presence and the cold bite of unresolved questions. The tension lingered, heavy, but the immediate threat had dissipated. The storm hadn't ended, but the first lightning had struck, illuminating the truth beneath the shadows. He exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging with the release of adrenaline. She leaned against him, head resting lightly on his shoulder, and he felt the weight of everything, the deception, the fear, the manipulation begin to ease, even if only slightly. They stayed on the pier, silent, letting the mist envelop them. He watched her watching him, and in that quiet, he understood something essential. The world outside the media, the leaks, the judgments was immaterial. The only thing that mattered now was this: trust forged in fire, love hardened by trials, and the courage to face the next chapter together. He felt the enormity of what had happened settle into his chest. This was no longer a game of reputation, no longer a dance of lies and appearances. This was reality, raw and unflinching, and within it there was a beauty he had never expected. The city lights twinkled in the distance, softened by fog, indifferent yet alive. The river beneath reflected the chaos of the night above, dark and restless, yet flowing steadily onward. Life, he realized, was much the same, unpredictable, relentless, and yet, in its quiet moments, achingly profound. She lifted her head and looked at him, eyes searching, vulnerable, unguarded. Do you think we can really survive this? He smiled, faint, tired, but full of a conviction that had taken months to cultivate. Not just survive, he said, voice steady. We'll endure, and we'll be stronger for it. A faint light appeared on the horizon, the first hint of dawn breaking through the fog. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried promise, a fragile, glowing reminder that darkness, no matter how dense, always yields to light. He took a deep breath, feeling it fill his lungs, filling him with clarity. The manipulator, the leaks, the threats, they were all obstacles, tests, illusions designed to measure him. But the truth was undeniable. He had chosen honesty, trust, and love over fear. And in doing so, he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They stood together in the fog, the world muted around them, and he realized that the engagement, once a lie, had become a conduit for truth. She had made the fiction real. And in that transformation he had discovered something deeper than reputation, deeper than power, the unyielding force of human connection. He squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life, the certainty beneath uncertainty. Whatever comes next, he said, voice quiet but firm, we face it together. No masks, no games, just us. She nodded, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to believe it, to feel it, to embrace it. The fog began to lift, revealing the faint contours of the pier, the river glinting with the first hints of sunlight, and the city slowly waking to a new day. It was still fragile, still uncertain, but for a fleeting, profound moment, the chaos felt manageable, real, beautiful, human. They lingered there, letting the silence speak, letting the weight of the night settle into memory. Every heartbeat felt deliberate, every breath measured, every glance exchanged a quiet affirmation of resilience and trust. He understood now that the climax had been not a confrontation with an enemy, but a confrontation with himself, with his fears, his doubts, his capacity for honesty, and the courage to let someone in completely. The manipulator had tested them, but the real revelation had come from within, and as the first full rays of sunlight stretched across the fog-tinged river, illuminating their faces, he realized something he hadn't before. The world could still be unpredictable, dangerous, and relentless, but together they had found a point of unwavering certainty, a truth worth defending, a love worth fighting for. He looked down at her, at the woman who had transformed pretense into reality, and smiled, finally at peace. We've survived the storm, he whispered, and now we begin again. The pier was quiet, the river flowing steadily, the city alive but distant. A calm descended after the tension, the suspense, the fear. Yet beneath it all, there remained a pulse, a rhythm, a sense of anticipation. Life would move forward, challenges would arise, secrets would still unfold, but for now, they had faced the apex of revelation together and emerged intact, connected, and undeniably real. And in that fragile, luminous moment, he understood that survival was no longer about money, power, or reputation. It was about truth, love, and the courage to remain open, even in a world built on deception. They lingered on the pier as the sun rose, shadows stretching long behind them. The storm had passed, for now, but the journey, messy, unpredictable, beautiful, was just beginning. The city woke slowly, the sunlight soft and golden, spilling across rooftops and streets that had seemed distant and untouchable only hours ago. From the penthouse, the view was breathtaking, not just in the way it stretched endlessly to the horizon, but in the way it reminded him how small even the most powerful life could feel when measured against the vastness of everything else. The fog that had haunted the pier the night before had lifted, leaving clarity in its wake, and with it, a strange sense of stillness, like the world itself was exhaling. He sat at the edge of the balcony, coffee in hand, the warmth seeping through his fingers. She joined him silently, slipping her hand into his. No words were necessary. The tumult of the past weeks' staged engagement, the leaks, the manipulators' games, the confrontations, the fears, the truths had all led to this pause. A quiet, fragile moment that felt suspended in time, as if the universe had granted them permission to simply exist. He looked down at the streets below, cars glinting like scattered beads in the morning light, and felt a strange lightness. The power, the money, the meticulous planning, they had been important once, a measure of control over the world. But now, after everything, they seemed almost inconsequential. What mattered, what had always mattered, was human connection. The risk taken, the vulnerability exposed, the heart laid bare. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Her hair caught the light, glinting faintly like copper threads. "Do you ever think we'll stop being tested?" she asked, voice soft, thoughtful. "Or is that just life?" He smiled faintly, a mixture of wariness and serenity. "I don't think the tests ever really stop," he said, "but maybe it's about learning which ones are worth enduring, and who's worth standing beside when they come." The simplicity of the truth struck him harder than any confrontation ever could. Life, he realized, wasn't about avoiding chaos or controlling perception. It was about choosing where to anchor yourself, and in whom. She had anchored herself in him, even when everything was uncertain, and in doing so, she had reminded him of something essential. Love, trust, and authenticity cannot be faked. They cannot be calculated or staged. They must be lived. In the days that followed, the public slowly adjusted to the reality of their engagement. The media speculation dulled, replaced by more mundane stories, market trends, charity events, social gossip. No longer did their love exist under the microscope of suspicion. The manipulator never revealed themselves again, leaving only traces, lessons, and a subtle understanding. Sometimes the threats we face are not meant to destroy us, but to illuminate who we are, and who we choose to be when confronted with the impossible. He returned to the office, the heart of his empire, and found it strangely familiar yet changed. The spaces were the same: marble floors, glass walls, the hum of commerce, but he walked through them differently. Each handshake, each negotiation, each glance carried a new awareness, that even in a world of immense wealth and influence, the human element, the sincerity, the trust, the relationships we nurture was the true measure of significance. She visited often, and together they rebuilt their routines, their life intertwined in ways both mundane and extraordinary. Cooking in the kitchen, laughing over breakfast, walking through the city streets hand in hand, they discovered the profound beauty of ordinary moments. Moments that, before, would have been overshadowed by ambition, by calculation, by the constant need to perform. Now, they were sacred. One afternoon, they stood on the balcony overlooking the skyline. The light was softer than dawn, a gentle warmth that seemed to settle into the bones. He turned to her, feeling the fullness of gratitude and awe, and realized that every orchestrated engagement, every lie, every manipulative scheme had been a prelude to this, an unpolished, unguarded reality in which they could simply exist together, without pretense. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" she asked, eyes distant, thoughtful. "The lie that became this." He nodded slowly, letting the weight of reflection settle over him. "Yes," he said, "I think about it often, and I think maybe life is like that. Sometimes the most unexpected, even artificial beginnings can lead to the most authentic endings, but only if we're brave enough to let go of the parts we control." She smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. Their hands found each other, fingers interlacing with an ease that spoke of countless shared battles, of trust tested and proven. In that silence, in that connection, the world beyond the balcony seemed distant, irrelevant, almost fictional. Time moved forward imperceptibly at first. They celebrated milestones quietly, privately, small victories over fear, small affirmations of love. And as they did, he began to see his life not as a series of staged performances or corporate maneuvers, but as a canvas in which the most powerful strokes were those of vulnerability, honesty, and courage. He thought of the manipulator, of the anonymous threats, of the chaos that had once threatened to consume everything, and he realized that the lesson was not about avoiding danger or deception. It was about embracing life with eyes open, ready to confront uncertainty with integrity, and to accept that some risks, especially those involving the heart, cannot be mitigated, only experienced fully. The seasons shifted. The city wore summer light, autumn haze, winter frost, and spring bloom. Each cycle mirrored the evolution of their lives, the growth of their relationship, the resilience they had cultivated. The engagement, once a fabrication, now stood as a testament to endurance and transformation, a symbol not of pretense, but of the human capacity to turn falsehood into truth, fear into intimacy, calculation into love. One evening, as they walked along the river, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the water, he stopped and looked at her. The reflection of the sky danced in her eyes, and he saw in them the quiet certainty of shared survival, the depth of connection that had been forged in fire. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, almost to himself, "how many of our choices are truly ours, And how many are shaped by forces we can't see, people we can't predict? She squeezed his hand, thoughtful. Maybe that doesn't matter, she said. Maybe what matters is who we choose to be in spite of it, who we decide to trust, who we decide to love, who we decide to become when the fog clears. He nodded. The words settled deep, resonating with something he had known all along but had never fully articulated. Life was unpredictable. The world was fraught with unseen pressures, hidden manipulations, and uncertain motives. Yet within that chaos, the human heart capable of love, resilience, and courage was the compass, the measure, the anchor. As night fell, the city lights reflected off the water, glittering like distant stars. He and she stood silently, side by side, letting the moment stretch unbroken, unforced. The past, the deception, the manipulations, the fear had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. The present, delicate and profound, was theirs. And in that quiet, luminous moment, he understood the final truth, that life, in all its unpredictable brilliance, was not about avoiding storms. It was about learning to stand together in the rain, to find stillness after chaos, and to allow love to transform even the most unlikely beginnings into something undeniably real. The river flowed steadily beneath the bridge, carrying reflections of city lights and sky alike, indifferent to human triumphs or mistakes. And yet, he felt an echo of eternity in that motion, a reminder that life, in its essence, moves forward regardless, but only those who open themselves fully can grasp its meaning. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you think we'll always be tested? He smiled, quiet, serene, the weight of experience grounding him. Perhaps, he said, but maybe the true test isn't about what comes at us, it's about who we become while facing it. And if we've learned anything, it's that the heart, when chosen, trusted, and embraced, can endure anything. The city shimmered around them, alive, endless, infinite, and as they stood there, hand in hand, he realized that the greatest victories are not measured in power, wealth, or prestige. They are measured in connection, courage, and the quiet triumph of being fully, honestly human. The night deepened, stars emerged, faint but steady, and the river reflected them in a dance of light and shadow. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle in, letting gratitude and awe fill him. And as he opened them again, he saw her face, illuminated by the glow of the city and the soft moonlight, and understood that some truths, those forged in love and trust, transcend everything else. The wind brushed against their faces. He felt it, felt her, felt the pulse of life itself. The questions lingered softly, unspoken yet profound. How much of what we believe is shaped by fear? How much by hope? And how often does the courage to trust transform a lie into a life fully lived? He squeezed her hand once more. The fog of uncertainty had lifted. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something enduring, quiet, and eternal remained: truth, connection, and love. The camera would pull back if this were a film, the skyline stretching endlessly, the river winding like silver through the city, two figures standing at the edge of everything, small yet infinite. And though the world went on, indifferent, a new story had been written, one of vulnerability, resilience, and the improbable power of a human heart fully surrendered. And somewhere in that silence, in that expanse, he knew, the engagement that began as deception had become the most authentic thing in his life. And perhaps, in the end, that was the point. Sometimes, reality begins in the shadow of a lie, and love, once real, can transform everything it touches.